What if height isn't as finished after puberty as people think? Right now, peptides like MK677, growth hormone compounds, and IGF-1 analogs are everywhere. Some people claim they added height. Others say it's complete nonsense. Both sides are missing the same thing, because peptides don't create height. They interact with the growth system, and whether that system still responds is what actually matters. If this topic matters to you, like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you already know about this. So before we talk peptides, you need to understand the biology they're trying to hack. I have added timestamps, so if you already understand this, you can skip to the peptide part. Height doesn't come from your spine stretching randomly or bones growing everywhere at once. It comes mainly from growth plates, soft cartilage zones at the ends of your long bones, especially in the legs. Inside these growth plates are chondrocytes. They multiply, lay down cartilage, and over time that cartilage turns into bone. That's how height increases during growth. But these builders don't act on their own. They respond to signals, mainly growth hormone and IGF-1. Growth hormone starts the process. IGF-1 determines how strong it is and how long it lasts. Here's the key point. This system doesn't shut off overnight. Different tissues lose responsiveness at different speeds. Some shut down earlier, others remain active longer. That's why compounds that affect growth hormone and IGF-1 can still have effects later in life. During puberty, rising hormones, especially estrogen, gradually change the growth plates. Over time, they become harder and more bone-like. This is called growth plate fusion. Fusion is gradual. Different bones mature at different speeds. Different people close this window at different ages. So growth doesn't suddenly stop. The system becomes less responsive over time. This is where most confusion around peptides comes from. Peptides don't force bones to grow. They don't override biology. They influence growth hormone and IGF-1 signaling. When parts of the system are still responsive, increasing those signals can sometimes support changes. When responsiveness fades, the effects shift. Then it still affects bone density, cartilage health, spinal discs, posture, and recovery. These don't usually add inches, but they do influence how tall and upright someone presents over time. So instead of possible or impossible, it's more accurate to think in terms of diminishing returns. And with that foundation, we can now look at the different categories of peptides and what each is realistically capable of. MK677 is different from most peptides. You don't inject it, you take it as a pill, and instead of targeting one narrow pathway, it raises growth hormone and IGF-1 at the same time, sometimes quite significantly. On the surface, that sounds almost too good to be true. Growth hormone and IGF-1 are the same signals involved in height during development, so it's easy to see why people connect this compound with the idea of growing taller. But how it actually works is where the story changes. Your body normally releases growth hormone in short, natural pulses, mainly during deep sleep. This compound doesn't really follow that pattern. Instead, it keeps growth hormone levels elevated for long periods of time, creating a very different hormonal environment. For many people, this leads to clear and noticeable effects: deeper sleep, faster recovery, increased appetite, and changes in body composition. These outcomes are real and fairly consistent. When it comes to height, though, the picture becomes more nuanced. Because IGF-1 is raised continuously, it can also influence other hormones, including estrogen. And estrogen plays an important role in how growth-related tissues mature over time. This doesn't mean growth plates automatically close, but it does mean timing, dosage, and individual biology matter a lot. That's why experiences with this compound are so different. Some people, especially earlier in development, report changes that feel growth-related. Others notice improvements in posture, spinal decompression, or overall structure rather than actual bone length. And many people notice no height change at all, even though other benefits are obvious. So the takeaway isn't that it works or doesn't work. It's that it interacts with the growth system in a broad, indirect way. It amplifies signals, but it doesn't decide where those signals are used. This compound increases growth signals across the body, but it doesn't directly target the growth process itself. And to see what direct control looks like, we need to move to the heavy hitters: the compounds that act closest to the growth plates, HGH and IGF-1LR3. HGH is the classic heavy hitter because it sits at the top of the growth system. Doctors have used it for decades in children with growth hormone deficiency to increase IGF-1, which can raise growth velocity when the body is still in a true growth phase. But HGH is not a height shortcut for everyone. Its main job is to signal growth and recovery, and what your body does with that signal depends on the tissue that's still responsive. That's why in adults, HGH is more consistently linked to things like improved recovery, changes in body composition, and sometimes better bone density, rather than clear increases in height. It also comes with real risks if misused: water retention, insulin resistance, and long-term complications when pushed beyond medical oversight. So it's powerful, but it's not free power. IGF-1LR3 is different because it skips the signal step. Instead of telling your body to produce IGF-1, it delivers a longer-acting form directly into the system. That's why people call it a shortcut. IGF-1 is one of the most direct drivers of growth plate activity during development. But that also means it's easy to overshoot and disrupt normal regulation. The biggest immediate risk is blood sugar, because IGF-1 can push glucose out of the bloodstream quickly. That's why hypoglycemia is a serious concern. And because it bypasses natural feedback loops, it's not a compound to treat casually. So when you hear HGH and IGF-1 described as height tools, understand what that really means. They're closest to the growth pathway, and that's exactly why they demand the most caution. HGH and IGF-1L-R3 show what happens when you act directly on the growth system. But not everyone wants or should use compounds that sit that close to the growth plates. That's where growth hormone secretagogues come in. Instead of replacing hormones or bypassing regulation, these compounds try to stimulate the body's own growth hormone release. And how they do that makes all the difference. Your body doesn't release growth hormone in a steady stream. It releases it in short, powerful pulses, mainly during deep sleep. These pulses are part of how the body stays sensitive to growth signals over time. When growth hormone stays elevated constantly, the body can adapt and respond less. Pulses, on the other hand, deliver strong signals while still allowing recovery in between. That's the idea behind growth hormone secretagogues. Ibutamoren is often considered one of the cleaner secretagogues. It stimulates growth hormone release without significantly raising stress hormones like cortisol. Because of that, it's commonly associated with better sleep quality and recovery. Its effects are subtle but more controlled, which is why some people prefer it over stronger options. Hexarelin is much stronger. It produces very sharp growth hormone spikes and has been studied for its ability to increase growth velocity in younger individuals. That strength is also its downside. Strong stimulation can lead to faster desensitization if used improperly. Hexarelin is powerful, but it requires careful timing and restraint. GHRP2 and GHRP6 work in a similar way. Short, intense bursts of growth hormone. The key rule with these compounds is simple. They only work in pulses. Continuous exposure doesn't increase results, it shuts the response down. When used correctly, they amplify natural signaling. When used incorrectly, they stop working. This pulse-based approach is why secretagogues sit between indirect compounds like MK677 and direct effectors like HGH, and why understanding timing matters more than dosage. Secretagogues focus on short, natural growth hormone pulses, but not all. Compounds work that way. Some peptides are designed to keep growth hormone, or its downstream signals, elevated for much longer periods. This changes the effect from sharp stimulation to ongoing support. That's where growth hormone analogs come in. CJC1295 works differently from secretagogues. Instead of creating brief spikes, it keeps growth hormone levels elevated for extended periods, sometimes days after a single dose. This makes it more convenient, but also less natural. Sustained elevation can support recovery and tissue maintenance, yet it relies heavily on how responsive the growth system still is. Higher levels alone don't automatically translate to greater growth. Tesamorelin was originally developed for medical use related to fat metabolism. Its primary effect is a significant increase in IGF-1. While it hasn't been studied directly for height, its mechanisms suggest potential support for growth-related tissues when they are still adaptable. Outside of that context, its benefits are more commonly seen in recovery and metabolic health rather than increases in height. So after breaking all of this down, the picture should be a lot clearer. Peptides don't magically make you taller. They don't override biology. What they do is interact with the growth hormone IGF-1 system. And what you get out of that depends entirely on how responsive that system still is.